Imagine planning the perfect revenge and then reading it because you got feelings. Ooh! That is right. Today we're talking about Pasión de Gavilanes, a popular Colombian telenovela that came out in 2003, where we follow three brothers who are determined to get revenge to avenge their sister's death. Of course, like with any telenovela review, I will get into spoilers, so if you haven't seen this novela but want to, I suggest clicking out of this video and coming back to this one after you finish watching it. Before I get into my review of the telenovela, I will say I did like this novela, although it wasn't actually my favorite. Oh, hold on, hold your pitchforks, okay? Okay, look, I know it's a wild thing to say just because so many people love this telenovela. It's like their top novela of all time. But I just felt like, okay, it had a lot of fun, suspenseful moments, it had great villains, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of the plot events dragged on for a little too long for my liking, and it came to a point where I started to feel a little bit bored. And I wasn't as invested in the first half of the novela until the fun stuff started to happen. However, I am glad I finished it because it turned out to be pretty good. But again, I will dive into the flaws of this novela. But okay, without yapping too much, let's get straight into it. So the novela starts off with Livia Reyes, the youngest sister of the three Reyes brothers, meeting up with her lover, Bernardo. Now, she doesn't know that Bernardo is actually married with three older daughters, and every time that Livia brings up wanting to see him and visit him, he always comes up with some sort of excuse that she's not able to, and this is because he's actually hiding the fact that he's married and has three older daughters. However, even with all the secrecy, Livia ends up pregnant and the Reyes find out about her relationship. As a result, the Reyes brothers demand that Bernardo marry Livia in order to provide for her. Bernardo accepts, but he secretly plans on how to divorce his wife, Gabriela, in order to live with Livia. However, Bernardo's son-in-law, Fernando, finds out about his infidelity and threatens to tell Gabriela unless Bernardo secures his position and future within the Elizondo family's wealth and status. When Bernardo refuses, Fernando chases after him, where Bernardo suffers a fatal accident. Once the news of his death is out, Livia discovers that he lied to her this entire time about not being married or having a family. And of course, since she lives in a barrio, word got out quickly that one of the wealthiest and important men of the region was lying to her the entire time. One of the people of the barrio, Hortensia, sees this as an opportunity to gain some money. She, along with her two sons, forced Livia to go to the hacienda and reveal that she was pregnant with Bernardo's baby and ask for their help. Of course, this does not end well, and Livia unfortunately ends her life that night. When the Reyes brothers are informed of her death, they swore revenge on the family in order to avenge her death. However, their plans fail when each of the Reyes brothers fall in love with the Elizondo sisters. Okay, now that I have explained the plot, I will dive into the characters. So we are starting off with Livia Reyes. So Livia Reyes is the emotional starting point of the entire story, and her character represents innocence placed in the worst possible circumstances. She is young, hopeful, and deeply romantic, which makes her especially vulnerable to manipulation. What defines Livia is not just that she falls in love, but how she falls in love. Completely, blindly, and without questioning the reality of the situation. She believes in promises of a better life, in the idea that love can elevate her circumstances, and in a man who ultimately exists in a position of power over her. Her tragedy lies in the imbalance of that relationship. Livia is emotionally sincere, while Bernardo operates within secrecy and control. She doesn't fully grasp the consequences of being involved with a merry, wealthy man, and by the time reality catches up to her, it is already too late. Although, honestly, it wasn't even her fault because she didn't know that he was married. But, I feel like she was so caught up with him, like, being sincere and loving and wanting to buy a house for her and provide for her, that she just did not see the red flags that basically just that she was never allowed to visit him in the first place. But narratively, Livia is not just a character. She is a symbol of how innocence is exploited in a world driven by power, status, and deception. Her fate becomes the moral justification for the Reyes brothers' revenge, making her less present as the story continues, but infinitely influential in everything that follows. Now we will get into Juan Reyes, the eldest of the siblings. Juan Reyes is the anchor of the Reyes brothers, defined by his sense of duty, leadership, and control. He takes on the role of protector, not just physically, but emotionally, often suppressing his own needs to prioritize his family's goals. His identity is deeply tied to responsibility, which makes his character both strong and emotionally restricted. The revenge plot is something Juan approaches with focus and determination. For him, it is not just about anger, it is about justice and restoring balance after Libia's tragedy. However, this sense of purpose begins to fracture when he meets Norma. Unlike his brothers, who are more openly reactive, Juan resists his feelings, viewing them as a threat to the mission and to his role as the leader. His internal conflict becomes the core of his character. He is constantly balancing two opposing forces: the need to maintain control and the inevitability of emotional vulnerability. Norma challenges his rigidity, forcing him to confront the fact that control is not the same as strength. His growth comes from learning to allow himself to feel without seeing it as failure of leadership. In this way, Juan's journey is about redefining what it means to be strong. Now we're moving on to Oscar Reyes, which I believe he's the middle child. Well, the middle ones of the brothers. Oscar Reyes initially presents himself as one of the most carefree and charismatic of the brothers, someone who approaches life with humor, flirtation, and a sense of ease. However, this outward confidence masks a deeper emotional avoidance. Oscar uses charm as a shield, by keeping things light and playful. He avoids confronting the weight of his own feelings and the trauma that drives the revenge. His dynamic with Jimena forces that avoidance to collapse. What begins as teasing and attraction quickly evolves into something more serious, and Oscar finds himself unprepared for the depth of his own emotional response. Unlike Juan, who suppresses his feelings, Oscar distracts himself from them, which makes his eventual attachment feel almost accidental. He doesn't fall in love intentionally, it happens despite his efforts to remain detached. As his arc progresses, Oscar is pushed to confront the consequences of his actions. He can no longer rely on charm alone. He must learn accountability, honesty, and emotional vulnerability. His growth lies in realizing that love is not just about attraction or chemistry, but about responsibility and consistency, two things he initially struggles to provide. And I will say, at the beginning of the novela, Oscar did kind of annoy me just because he was always he just didn't seem so concerned about his brothers. Like, he was always looking after himself. He was setting up Franco to go on dates with wealthy women, even when Franco is clearly against that, and he keeps telling Oscar that that's not how he is, and he's even like, well, why don't you go after the women, since you're so interested in money? And Oscar is like, no, because like they're attracted to you. I don't know, it just came to the point where it was just really annoying. But he does have an arc towards the end of the novela, which I appreciate. Franco Reyes is the most emotionally introspective of the brothers, and his quiet nature often makes him seem less dominant in the narrative. But in reality, he carries a significant emotional weight. He processes grief and conflict internally, choosing silence over confrontation. This makes him appear calm, but that calmness is often a form of restraint rather than peace. His relationship with Sara is built on mutual understanding rather than immediate intensity. Both characters are reserved, both are guarded, and both struggle with expressing their emotions openly. This creates a dynamic that feels more subtle but also more psychologically complex. Franco does not rush into love. He grows into it, which makes his emotional journey feel more grounded and, at times, more painful. What defines Franco's arc is the tension between passivity and action. He wants emotional safety and stability, but the circumstances around him force him to confront difficult truths and make decisions he would rather avoid. His development comes from learning that avoiding conflict does not protect him. It only delays the inevitable. In many ways, Franco represents the cost of internalizing pain rather than addressing it directly. And also another thing I want to add is that Franco, I don't want to say emotional, but in a way emotional out of the three brothers, just because I feel like he does not like conflict. He likes to avoid a lot of things. Dare I say he's one of like the most love-struck, besides Juan, I'm guessing. Just because, for example, in the beginning half of the novela, he kind of lived for Rosario. Like every single night he was at the bar, and I will explain her character later, don't worry. But every single night he was at the bar with her, and he was always looking for her. And he was like, everything I do is for you. And he even, when he was trying to help out Rosario financially, like he gave everything he earned when he was working at the fruit stand to her. And even though it wasn't enough, like he was forcing himself just for her. And I feel like that's another character trait of his. Like he is just so loving. Like he loves so much that he will do anything for that person, and that includes his brothers. So I do like that about his character. Okay, now we will get into the Elizondo family. So we are starting off with Gabriela. Oh my god. Okay. Gabriela Elizondo is defined by control, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to social status. She believes that maintaining the family's reputation is more important than addressing emotional realities, which leads her to enforce strict rules and expectations. Her parenting style is rooted in authority rather than understanding. She views emotions as weaknesses that must be managed or suppressed, which creates distance between her and her daughters. While she believes she is protecting her family, her rigidity ultimately contributes to their emotional struggles. Gabriela's arc is about the consequences of control. As the story progresses, her inability to adapt or empathize leads to a loss of influence over her children. She represents how prioritizing image over authenticity can fracture relationships and create long-term emotional damage. Okay, now that I've explained her character, I can finally rant about her now because y'all do not fucking understand how much I despise this character. Oh my god, like she is the same level as Aida from Teresa, okay? She is I wanted to, every time she came on screen, I wanted to fucking punch her face. Okay, oh my god. I sound really aggressive, but that's how much she annoyed me. That bitch was insoportable. Like, she was the ultimate pick-me in this novela, and that's saying something, because girl, you're like, what, a 50, 60-year-old woman, and you're over here, like, choosing a man over your own fucking daughters, like, no, I just cannot get over that. And honestly, like, I don't even know how her daughters forgave her at the end of the novela. Because what do you mean that you practically arranged Norma's marriage to Fernando just because you wanted to be close to Fernando? Because you were attracted to him and you wanted to be close to him the entire... Like, what? No! Ew, like, no. Like, hello, like, honestly, I just feel like she only thinks about herself and always puts Fernando first before her own daughters. Like, she always considers his feelings over her 3 daughters. Like, I get you want your own happiness after after your first husband dies and you find out that he was cheating on you with a younger woman, but... your own son-in-law? Are we sure about that? Especially when who your daughter clearly despises also. Norma has explicitly stated that she was uncomfortable around him, that she did not like when he touched her, when he tried to be intimate with her, and literally the whole family saw that one time he tried to SA her, and the fucking mom didn't kick him out. Like, she was just like, Fernando, like, stop it. Like, bruh. What? And not only that, it was the fact that she was so blinded by her weird obsession with this man that she practically let him do whatever she wanted. She practically let him do whatever she wanted. Oh my god, whatever he wanted.
Dad, you
even almost being financially bankrupt when she let Fernando spend all her fucking dumb money on it when Fernando married her. Oh, spoiler alert, right? The worst part though, which I would personally never forgive her for if I was one of her daughters, was when Fernando almost tried to SA Jimena when they were alone in, I guess, in the campo. Okay, so context. Jimena was chasing Fernando and Rosario, and this was when Fernando was already married to Gabriela. So she was chasing Rosario and Fernando because Fernando let Rosario take her horse, And Jimena didn't like that. So she chased them. And when Rosario left, Fernando took that opportunity to try to SA her. And when Jimena told her mom about it through tears, like she was like so affected by it, which I mean, anyone would be like that. Her own fucking mom had the audacity to not believe her and tell her that she was lying because Fernando would never do that. And like, oh, you're only making that up because you hate Fernando. Oh my.
Hell no, man. What the fuck,
Oh
man?
my. No, no, like what? Excuse me? If my own mother did that, she would stop having the privilege of being called mom because, hell nah, bitch. Like, no. Like, how dare you, as a mom, not believe your own daughter like that, especially when you know that he can be like that because he tried to do the same thing with Norma before and you saw it happening. I just can't believe her own mother would believe her shitty husband over her own daughter, and she's always acting like her daughters mean the world to her when they don't. Like, if they meant the world to you, you would prioritize them over your shitty fucking husband. Like, and honestly, this is why male-centered women, especially moms, are really dangerous because they put their daughters in a situation like these where, let's say, the husband tries to take advantage of the daughter and the mother will not believe her because she is so blinded by her obsession with a man. And honestly, like, it's also to a point where some moms are so jealous of their daughters, which is so gross, by the way, but they just become jealous of their daughter's beauty and their youth. They're so insecure about their own self that they just like do not care about their own daughter's well-being, and they will believe a man over anything. Like, it's just so disgusting and concerning, and they let this kind of cycle of abuse to continue, which is so horrific. And honestly, last thing, I didn't even feel bad when she was being held captive by Fernando and Dinora and realized that he was cheating on her with Dinora. Like, bitch, you fucking deserve that. Like, I did not give a fuck. Like, and this was also the only time where she didn't piss me off. It took you 187 fucking episodes, but I digress. Okay, now, before I get more pissed off, moving on to Norma Elizondo. So, Norma Elizondo begins the story as a character defined by restriction. She exists within a framework of expectations: marriage, family, honor, and societal image, and has learned to suppress her own desires in order to maintain stability. Her life is structured, controlled, and emotionally unfulfilling, even if it appears perfect from the outside. Meeting Juan disrupts that structure. For the first time, Norma is confronted with a version of herself that is driven by desire rather than obligation. This creates a deep internal conflict, as she is forced to question the life she has accepted. Her struggle is not just about choosing Juan over status, but about choosing between two identities: the obedient daughter and wife, or an autonomous individual capable of making her own decisions. Norma's arc is one of awakening. She gradually moves from passivity to agency, from repression to self-expression. However, this transformation is not immediate or easy. It is filled with guilt, fear, and resistance, which makes her journey feel realistic and emotionally layered. She represents the tension between societal expectations and personal fulfillment. Although there was one thing that did annoy me about her, which was when Dinora, she was in the picture and was obviously trying to make her jealous by trying to get herself closer to Juan. And Norma immediately got jealous and assumed that Juan was like into her. And like, she honestly just like kind of created a problem out of nothing when Juan was like obviously trying to tell her that he was not into her and that she was always trying to get with him, which was true. And another thing was when the Reyes secret of them of not being construction workers was out and that they were trying to get revenge for their sister, Dinora was taking advantage of their distance. And when that was happening, everyone told her contradictory things about Juan, and she was warned to not believe all the negative things that were said about him. The Norma says that she is not easily influenced by anything and that any decision about Juan will solely be based on like her beliefs and her judgment. However, we clearly see the exact opposite when she initially believes everything Dinora is saying about Juan, which was that he took advantage of her and abused her. Like, girl, you literally just said that no one is influencing you. And literally, like, she was the one that was actively causing a distance between it. I mean, I understand that she was hurt by the lies of them coming to the hacienda and them trying to infiltrate their lives because they want a revenge on their sister. But it's like, I get that, but also, he was always trying to actively talk with her and trying to tell her, his reasoning behind all of that. That was the one little thing that annoyed me about her, but anyways, moving on. Sarita Elizondo is perhaps the most internally complex of the sisters. On the surface, she is composed, reserved, and controlled, but beneath that exterior is a constant struggle with identity, fear, and emotional vulnerability. She is deeply aware of societal expectations and internalizes them in a way that shapes how she sees herself and her desires. Her relationship with Franco becomes a space where those internal conflicts begin to surface. Unlike more outwardly expressive characters, Sarah does not immediately embrace her feelings. Instead, she questions them, resists them, and tries to reconcile them with the version of herself she believes she should be. This makes her arc more psychological than dramatic. Sarah's journey is about self-acceptance. She must confront not only her feelings for Franco, but also her own fears of judgment and loss of control. Her development is slower and more introspective, but it's also deeply meaningful. She represents the idea that some of the most significant conflicts are not external, but internal. I will say, for majority of the novela, Sarita was one of my least favorite characters. I thought she was stuck up and insoportable. It was kind of a helicopter sister who acted as their mom most of the time. And I understand that she wanted the best for her sisters, especially Jimena, but she always ended up just making them kind of distance themselves from her because Sarita was always a little too involved in their personal lives. And I also hated how she was encouraging Fernando to get closer to Norma when Norma opened up to Sarita and how she loathed him and couldn't stand it when Fernando touched her because it kept reminding her about her SA. It just felt like a slap to the face every time Sarita was defending Fernando and honestly kind of just kissing ass to him even after Norma clearly stating why she wants to separate from him. However, I really do like her character arc towards the later part of the novela, so at least she gets a redemption arc. So now we're getting to Jimena Elizondo. So Jimena Elizondo stands in contrast to her sisters through her openness and impulsiveness. She is expressive, passionate, and less constrained by the expectations that define her family. Where Norma is repressed and Sara is cautious, Jimena is immediate. She feels something, and she acts on it. This impulsiveness, however, comes with its own challenges. While she embraces freedom, she does not always fully consider the emotional consequences of her actions. Her relationship with Oscar begins as playful and exciting, but as it deepens, Jimena is forced to confront the reality that emotional connection requires more than spontaneity. Her arc is about balance. She does not need to learn how to feel. She already does it naturally. Instead, she must learn how to sustain those feelings in a stable and meaningful way. Jimena represents the idea that freedom is not just about doing what you want, but about understanding the impact of those choices. Jimena was also pretty messy during the beginning of the novela, and I found myself really wondering if I really liked her character or not. Like, for example, at the beginning of the novela, we see Jimena flirting with Fernando, knowing fully well that he's married to her sister. And I especially didn't like the way she was treating Ruth, a family friend, when she kept visiting the hacienda. I know she was being rude to Ruth due to her jealousy of Ruth always talking to Oscar, but the way she was talking to Ruth just made her seem really nasty and insecure. However, like Sarita, she has her own character arc later in the villa, which I'm sure we all appreciated. Now we are getting to Don Martin. So Don Martin serves as a grounding presence within the story, offering wisdom and perspective in contrast to the chaos around him. He represents a more balanced form of authority, one that values both tradition and emotional understanding. Unlike more controlling figures, Don Martin listens, observes, and provides guidance without imposing rigid expectations. His role is not to dominate the narrative, but to offer clarity when others are overwhelmed by conflict. He symbolizes a healthier form of masculinity, one that is not defined by control or aggression, but by empathy and experience. His presence highlights the possibility of stability within an otherwise turbulent environment. Don Martin was really cute. He's an adorable grandpa, but the only thing I didn't like about him was that he was a little too comfortable harassing the female employees and slapping their asses when they clearly didn't like it when he did that. Like, damn, bitch, like, how would you like it if I slapped your bald ass head the entire time? Like, to me, it shows a clear abuse of power since he is the father of Gabriela, who owns the hacienda. So, even if the female employees express their discomfort, nothing would happen because the employees are always seen as less than and are easily replaceable, which obviously these people can afford. Okay, now moving on to Fernando Escandon. So Fernando operates as one of the primary antagonistic forces within the story, but what makes him compelling is that his behavior is rooted in insecurity rather than pure malice. He is deeply concerned with status, control, and perception, and he uses manipulation as a way to maintain his position within the Elizondo family. His actions are calculated rather than emotional. While other characters are driven by love, grief, or desire, Fernando is driven by tragedy. He observes situations, identifies weaknesses, and exploits them to his advantage. This makes him particularly dangerous, as he is not easily swayed by emotional conflict. At his core, Fernando represents a form of toxic control. He equates power with security and views relationships as tools rather than connections. His inability to form genuine emotional bonds isolates him, even as he gains influence. In this way, his character highlights the emptiness that comes from prioritizing control over authenticity. And of course, we all know that he is an asshole and an abuser and an essayer, and he is one of the worst fucking characters that comes out of the novela, so. But that is without saying. So now moving on to Rosario Montes. Rosario Montes is one of the most independent and unconventional female characters in this story. She exists outside of the rigid expectations that define the Elizondo family, embracing her sensuality and autonomy without apology. This makes her both powerful and controversial within the narrative. Her relationships are driven by passion rather than stability, which often places her at the center of emotional conflict. Rosario does not conform to traditional ideals of femininity or morality, and this challenges both the characters around her and the audience's perception of her. However, her independence also comes with emotional unpredictability. She seeks connection but resists confinement, creating a tension between desire and freedom. Rosario represents a different kind of strength, one that is rooted in self-expression even when it leads to instability. Rosario was actually one of my favorite characters before she had this weird, unlikable character change in the middle of the novela, which honestly didn't even make sense with her character. For example, when she was with Franco, she was a lot more humble and genuinely loved him instead of being interested in anything that was extremely materialistic. Actually, for a little while, Franco was living with Rosario and she was kind of the one maintaining him. Another example is when Franco first started going out with Jimena. Oh, a little weird, I know. And Rosario saw them together. She only wished him the best and wanted him to be happy. However, when Armando becomes her manager, she began to change as a person, and not in a good way. But when Franco proposed marriage to her, Rosario told him that she was not one for marriage and that she never saw that for herself. She was suddenly fine with the idea of marriage and married him pretty soon after. The thing that annoyed me the most was when she became extremely jealous when Franco began seeing Sarita, and she was constantly trying to break them up and seduce Franco now that he was pretty much a millionaire after the death of Edwina Trueba, who he married in order to help out his brothers, and she left her fortune for Franco. Honestly, it just made no sense for Rosario to marry Armando because it was abundantly clear that he was abusive, controlling, and an extremely possessive person, and it was always known that Rosario liked her freedom. Rosario turns good again after coming to her senses when Armando dies, so yeah. Okay, now moving on to Armando Navarro. So Armando Navarro represents the superficial aspects of wealth and status. He operates comfortably within elite social circles, but his character lacks the emotional depth seen in others. His priorities are centered on image, appearances, and maintaining his position. This makes him more of a symbolic character than an emotionally complex one. He reflects the emptiness that can exist beneath privilege, highlighting the contrast between material wealth and genuine connection. Through Armando, the story emphasizes that status does not equate to substance. While he may appear successful on the surface, his lack of emotional engagement sets him apart from characters who are actively shaped by love, conflict, and personal growth. He was obviously one of my least favorite characters because that hoe was abusive and controlling. And he ordered his wife, Rosalia, to be killed because she kept cheating on him. Like, girl. And then he literally did the same thing by cheating on Rosario with Dinora. Like, but go off, I guess. Now we're moving on to Eva Rodriguez. So Eva Rodriguez is one of the most emotionally intuitive characters in the story. She is deeply empathetic, often sensing tensions and truths before they are openly acknowledged. Her role is not central in terms of power, but is essential in terms of emotional support. She consistently prioritizes the well being of others, sometimes at the expense of her own needs. This selflessness makes her a stabilizing force, but it also highlights the emotional labor she carries. Eva represents quiet strength. She does not seek control or recognition, but her presence is crucial in maintaining a sense of humanity within the chaos. She embodies the idea that care and empathy are just as important as action in shaping outcomes. And honestly, I was supporting her when she was wanting to get revenge on Gabriela by helping out the Reyes brothers.
Oh, you go, Glen Coco.
I'll do the same fucking thing. Okay, now that we finished analyzing the characters, I will now be analyzing the romance. The relationship between Norma and Juan is built on tension from the very beginning. Not just romantic tension, but ideological conflict. Juan enters the Elizondo world with a clear purpose, revenge, and a rigid sense of control over his emotions. Norma, on the other hand, is trapped in a life defined by obligation. Her identity has been shaped by her role as a wife and daughter rather than by her own desires. What draws them together is not compatibility in the traditional sense, but the way each represents something the other lacks. Juan embodies strength and emotional certainty, while Norma embodies vulnerability and suppressed longing. Together, they create a dynamic that feels intense and almost inevitable, but also deeply unstable. One of the central flaws in the relationship is that it begins under false pretenses. Juan is not honest about his intentions, and Norma is not fully honest about the extent of her dissatisfaction and emotional needs. This creates a foundation where trust is compromised from the start. Their connection is fueled by secrecy and emotional urgency rather than transparency, which makes every moment feel heightened but also fragile. Additionally, Norma's existing marriage complicates everything. Her involvement with Juan is not just a romantic choice, it is a moral and social rebellion, one that carries consequences she is not fully prepared to face. Another key issue is Juan's tendency to control rather than communicate. He often believes that protecting Norma means making decisions for her or withholding information, which mirrors, in a different way, the lack of agency she experiences in her family. While he represents freedom to her, he also risks recreating the same dynamic of control, just under a different emotional framework. The relationship, therefore, is not simply about love overcoming obstacles. It is about whether they can transform their connection into something built on honesty and mutual respect rather than intensity and circumstance. I can see why this pair is a fan favorite. They have the most chemistry, in my opinion, and their love was the strongest out of all of them. Like, even after all the obstacles and everything that was thrown their way, like, they did not falter. Like, they did not see other people. They always were longing each other, and they even had a child together. So now, Jimena and Oscar's relationship is the most immediately dynamic and playful, built on attraction, chemistry, and a shared sense of spontaneity. From the beginning, their connection feels effortless in a way that others do not. They flirt easily, challenge each other, and seem to exist in a space where the tension of the larger conflict temporarily disappears. However, this ease is also what makes the relationship deceptively complex. What begins as lighthearted quickly becomes emotionally significant, and neither of them is fully prepared for that shift. The primary flaw in their relationship is emotional inconsistency. Oscar, in particular, struggles with taking things seriously. He uses humor and charm to navigate situations, but when faced with real emotional stakes, he hesitates. Jimena, while more open with her feelings, also has a tendency to act impulsively, which can create instability when paired with Oscar's avoidance. Together, they create a cycle where one pushes forward emotionally while the other pulls back, leading to moments of miscommunication and frustration. Another layer of tension comes from the fact that their relationship begins almost as a game. There is an element of performance in how they interact, especially early on, where neither fully acknowledge the depth of what they are feeling. This makes it difficult for them to establish trust, because sincerity is often masked by teasing or deflection. As their connection deepens, they are forced to confront the reality that what they have is no longer casual. Their challenge is learning how to transition from a relationship built on attraction and spontaneity to one that can sustain emotional honesty and commitment. Lastly, we have Franco and Sarita, with a little bit of Rosario. To be honest, these two made the least amount of sense in my opinion. For example, we never saw any sort of initial attraction between the two in the beginning of the novela until it was time for them to be together for the plot, I guess. Honestly, I always thought that he had better chemistry with Rosario than Sarita because his relationship with Sarita low-key came out of nowhere. Like I said, before they got together, we never got a single interaction between them, and it seemed like Sarita hated him from the start. Their trope is enemies to lovers, which personally I'm not a huge fan of. I know. But I feel like they could have done a lot of a better job of showing the progress from enemies to lovers instead of having them interact all of a sudden and throwing insults at each other and then kissing 2 episodes a year. Nonetheless, the relationship is the most introspective and emotionally complex, defined less by external conflict and more by internal struggle. Both characters are reserved, thoughtful, and deeply affected by their own insecurities, which creates a connection rooted in mutual understanding rather than immediate passion. Their bond develops slowly, built on moments of quiet vulnerability rather than dramatic declarations. This makes the relationship feel more grounded, but also more fragile, as both are hesitant to fully express what they feel. The central flaw in their dynamic is emotional repression. Neither Franco nor Sara is comfortable being fully open, which leads to a pattern of unspoken feelings and missed opportunities for clarity. They often assume rather than communicate, which creates space for doubt and misunderstanding. This becomes especially problematic when external pressures begin to interfere, as their lack of direct communication makes it difficult to maintain stability in the relationship. This is where Rosario enters as a disruptive force. Unlike Sara, Rosario is expressive, confident, and unafraid of desire. She represents a completely different type of connection for Franco. One is immediate, physical, and emotionally intense in a more outward way. The triangle between Rosario, Sara, and Franco is not just about choosing between 2 women, but about choosing between 2 versions of emotional experience. Sara offers depth, stability, and understanding, while Rosario offers passion, freedom, and intensity. For Franco, this creates a significant internal conflict. His natural inclination toward emotional safety draws him to Sara, but his vulnerability and unresolved grief makes him susceptible to Rosario's intensity. For Sara, the triangle amplifies her insecurities and fear of not being enough, reinforcing her tendency to withdraw rather than fight for the relationship. The flaw here is not just jealousy or competition. It is the inability of all 3 characters to fully articulate their needs and intentions. Ultimately, this relationship dynamic explores the tension between emotional depth and emotional expression. Franco must decide not only who he loves, but how he is capable of loving, while Sara must confront her fear of vulnerability, and Rosario must navigate the consequences of pursuing desire without restraint. Now I'm going to get into the flaws of the novela and what I didn't like about it. So one of the biggest flaws in Pasión de Gavilanes is that, while it is incredibly engaging in its core romance and revenge plotlines, it often suffers from pacing issues that make certain story arcs feel unnecessarily prolonged, instead of tightening emotional turning points and letting character developments breathe through progression. The novela frequently stretches single conflicts across multiple episodes in a way that can feel repetitive. A clear example of this is Juan Reyes' kidnapping arc. While the first kidnapping already serves as a strong narrative device to heighten tension and deepen the stakes of the Reyes family conflict, the storyline is extended further into second kidnapping involving Juan and Gabriela that takes place over literally 10 episodes, and nothing eventful happened during them, except for the deaths of Fernando and Ninora. And even that felt a little underwhelming. It also didn't help that this kidnapping was also the ending of the novela, and we barely had enough screen time for the bonding of Norma and Juan after their marriage. Even though the intention behind this extended arc is understandable, particularly in showing Gabriela's gradual exposure to Juan's character and the beginning of her shifting perception of him. The execution feels drawn out to the point where the emotional impact becomes diluted rather than intensified. Instead of making the transformation feel more meaningful, the repetition of survival situations in the swamp begins to feel stagnant, and the urgency of the storyline loses momentum. A similar pacing issue appears in the repeated conflict involving the Elizondo sisters debating whether they should leave the hacienda after Fernando assumes a more powerful role in the household. The argument itself makes sense within the story, since their concern for their mother and distrust of Fernando creates a valid emotional and moral dilemma. However, the problem is that this conflict is recycled across multiple episodes with very little variation in the outcome or emotional progression. The sisters repeatedly cycle through the same arguments: fear for Gabriela's safety versus a desire for independence, and also because the Reyes brothers were kind of pressuring them to leave the hacienda and wanting them to live with them, and without the storyline introducing enough new information or consequences to justify its length. As a result, instead of feeling like a developing conflict, it begins to feel like the narrative is circling the same emotional ground, which can make the sisters' frustration feel contagious to the viewer. Beyond specific storylines, another structural flaw of the novela is that it sometimes relies too heavily on repetition of emotional beats rather than escalation. Many conflicts are reintroduced rather than resolved, which can weaken the sense of progression that is essential in long-form storytelling. This is especially noticeable in how misunderstandings, mistrust, and romantic tension are often stretched across extended timelines instead of being used to push characters toward decisive turning points. While this style is consistent with traditional telenovela formatting, it can still create moments where the narrative feels slower than necessary, particularly when viewers are already emotionally invested and ready for resolution. Additionally, the novela occasionally struggles with balancing its ensemble cast. With so many central characters and intersecting love stories, some arcs feel more developed than others, while certain conflicts are repeatedly prioritized over new or potentially more interesting developments. This uneven distribution of narrative focus can make the pacing feel inconsistent, as some storylines advance quickly while others stall. At times, this creates the impression that the writers are extending existing drama rather than introducing fresh conflicts or allowing characters to evolve more organically. Like, for example, I just feel like we could have had more interactions between Franco and Sarita, have them have more like tension rather than just Franco always panning over Rosario and then Sara always like hating them. I don't know, it just like felt the same thing over and over again, so it was just a little repetitive and boring. So after going through everything in Pasión de Gavilanes, I honestly understand why it's considered such an iconic novela. At its core, the story really works because of the relationships. Whether it's Juan and Norma, Oscar and Jimena, or Franco and Sara, each couple brings a completely different kind of emotional intensity. There's passion, conflict, healing, and that very dramatic telenovela energy that keeps you emotionally invested even when things get chaotic. And by the end of the story, everything does come full circle. The lies, the misunderstandings, and the revenge-driven tension eventually get resolved as the truth about what happened in the past is fully exposed. The Reyes brothers and the Elizondo sisters are forced to confront not just each other, but also everything that was built on secrecy and pain. Relationships that were once defined by revenge and distrust slowly shift into something more honest, and the characters are finally able to move past the cycles of retaliation that started everything in the first place. Even characters like Fernando and Armando ultimately pay the consequences with their lives, while Gabriela pays with her isolation and the emotional weight of losing control over the family she spent so long trying to dominate. So the ending isn't really about shock or twists. It's about resolution. The chaos doesn't disappear overnight, but it does settle into something more stable, where the characters finally get the chance to choose love and honesty over pride and revenge. And I think that's why the novela sticks with people, because even though it's messy and dramatic the entire way through, like with any novela, it still ends with this idea that people can grow, change, and find something real after everything falls apart. And now I need to know, who was your favorite couple? And who do you think caused the most chaos from the beginning to end? Let me know in the comments below, and also let me know which other telenovela or movie I should review. Okay? See you in the next one. Bye.